Welcome to the latest TezTalks Radio episode. We have myself, William McKenzie of Tezos Commons. We also have our other co-host, Brian Lee of Tezos Commons. And there's been quite a lot of stuff to get into that we've witnessed throughout the past few weeks. But before we get into all that, Brian, how's everything been on your end? It's pretty crazy with this election coming up.
Yeah, things are crazy with this election. I feel like I'm a little more insulated from it than you because I'm not living in the States right now. But yeah, I actually just voted a few days ago. It's not on chain, so you can't see who I voted for. But yeah, I think it was good to vote. If you didn't vote yet, maybe you can go ahead and do that. But other than that, things have been going pretty well. I was watching Unsolved Mysteries last night, and that's like the new kind of reboot on Netflix. And if you haven't watched it, I would recommend it. There was an episode that I watched last night about the reports of ghosts after the tsunami in Japan back in 2011. And yeah, it was very, very interesting. So if you haven't seen it, great thing to watch. But that's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about Tezos and the latest news within the ecosystem. So, Will, did you want to get us started with the first topic that we have here?
Yeah, sure. So I just want to lightly touch on, in case you did not see our previous TezTalks Live, we had Alon Brucedale of Blockchain EZ, one of the people working on DigiSign. He went through a presentation and provided a demonstration of the service, and it was also pretty exciting announcements that went on there. Sword Group is going to become a corporate baker. I believe when we're recording this, that hasn't been made. It hasn't happened yet, but it's expected to happen here pretty soon. And speaking of corporate bakers, we also received some news earlier today, actually, that EDF Energy, a huge energy company in the United Kingdom, they're going to also become a corporate baker. So there's definitely been quite a lot of exciting news and announcements as of late.
Yeah, definitely a lot of things going on in the ecosystem. And just I guess touching on the recent TezTalks related stuff that we've done, I would also recommend checking out the previous episode that we did with Gabriel Alfort. He's the lead developer on Legalang, and just a really smart person in general. I think we both left that conversation that we had. I just feel it felt illuminated or something, that we touched on so many different things. He gave his thoughts on blockchain security, future protocol amendments, and a bunch of other things. So definitely would recommend checking that out if you haven't already listened to it. That was episode 11. And the first thing that we kind of want to dive into is the concept of regular scheduling of amendments to the Tezos protocol. So I believe the proposed kind of time span that we're talking about is amendments every 3 months. So Will, did you want to give some thoughts on that? And I'll go ahead and follow up after that.
Yeah, I think this is a much needed evolution to the way things currently are. The previous proposals, Athens, we had Brest, we had a few others, and Carthage, the current one as well. And there wasn't really a set regular interval in terms of timing. So that leaves open longer times to get, certain features, such as, trends emerging, such as DeFi. That leaves a bigger window of time to get those changes implemented because, as we all know, through the amendment process, the process itself takes roughly 3 months. So when you're talking about, having a protocol upgrade once or twice a year, that's 6 months right there. So I think this will open that up in that sense to where some quick changes or, necessary features, even, one being sapling, which I believe is still expected to be the next amendment. It can get done and accomplished in a more timely manner as opposed to kind of what we saw initially with the first few amendments.
I think when it comes to software development, things often take longer than you think they would. But I think that at the same time, there is, of course, there are pros and cons to kind of, do we make the release time based on the completion of all of the features, or do we have kind of a set time interval that's like, in this case, every 3 months, something gets pushed over to mainnet? And there's pros and cons to both ways of doing things, but I think in the world of more traditional software development, there's this idea of sprints. So a sprint is basically a way of developing that allows you to have a continuous development cycle. Let's say every 6 weeks, like there's one sprint. So like sprint 1 is 6 weeks, and then after that you move on to sprint 2. So the idea of a sprint is just like you have tasks and you should finish it within those 6 weeks or whatever time frame that you want to make. And I think this allows for the sense of predictability. And in the case of an open source blockchain project like Tezos, it's kind of very different from a traditional like corporate kind of setting where everyone is working based on an internal schedule. And the other major difference being like people are typically all employed / incentivized to constantly be working. And, we'll get more into incentivization later on in the podcast, but in the world of open source software, sometimes things are a bit more unpredictable. So I think the more predictability that you can kind of build into how the protocol is shaped and developed over time, I think overall, that's definitely going to provide a more positive impact than the downside. So, of course, we'll go ahead and include a link to the Tezos Agora. I believe there was a discussion going on there. So people are kind of highlighting the pros and also talking about cons. For example, will 3 months time for each upgrade be enough time for, the various tools and other things that we have in the ecosystem? Is it enough time for those tools to change and adapt? Or, will the protocol upgrade first and then those tools will have to upgrade after that? So there's these kinds of smaller things that still need to be hashed out. But I think in general, moving over to a more predictable upgrade process is very good for developers because they can kind of really schedule and predict their workloads.
Yeah, and just going off on that, I think one of the reason why this is good, adding on to that, is that doing things the way that they were done previously, and we kind of already saw it. That sort of approach, it often leads to some of these injections occurring at longer and longer intervals apart from each other. So I think it's definitely a step in the right direction, and not just rushing to implement certain features just to catch the next trend, but it's going to constantly help Tezos evolve at a much more steady pace than what we saw previously.
Yeah, and like just to add one more thing, I don't think we should discount kind of the Moon Boy kind of perspective on this, because if you have a system where your network does upgrade every 3 months, that kind of in itself generates some buzz for the project. And that's kind of a naive way of looking at it, but that's only because crypto itself is quite naive at the moment. The market is largely driven by speculation. So as a project, maybe it's smart to take advantage of the kind of social consciousness around this sector right now. So that's kind of like one thing that is not really technical at all. But the fact it's just true. Like the news outlets, the community, and I guess like the crypto sector as a whole, they like to see progress. And if you're able to kind of package that progress into like, hey, we're upgrading our mainnet, or we're like pushing out these upgrades, I kind of think that's like a really smart idea. And it's contrary to many projects out there which don't really take advantage of the hype cycle. Because when you're in an ecosystem where the incentivization strategy, like we'll talk later, is kind of based on the currency of your protocol, if you're able to capture and take advantage of these hype cycles, that's not being stupid. That's actually being smart, because you can kind of increase the value of the token of the network, and then you kind of get more bang for your buck when you're doing these kinds of incentivization programs. So that's also like one way that I'm looking at it, and I see that as an advantage for a system where we see upgrades that kind of can be pushed to news outlets and stuff like that every few months.
So moving on to our next topic. Recently there was a Tezos Town Hall, and Alexander Liu, you may know him from all of the articles he's written on the Tezos lawsuits and litigation, and also within Telegram, was present, as well as Robert Fontaine. You may know him as the new Tezos Foundation community manager. And I actually attended that. Both Alex and Robert talked about community incentives. That is something I know you have a lot of thoughts on, Brian. And they kind of shared a few points and thoughts at, what, when you come to Tezos, there's all these different mechanisms and, things, and it's difficult to kind of figure out how to get started. And they talked about how you can get started, and some of the recent incentives that actually Tezos Commons and TQ are working on. Brian, would you like to talk about some of those?
Yeah, so the idea behind this new program is that we want a way to reward members in the community who really go above and beyond to benefit the entire ecosystem. And that's a quote taken from the announcement post here. And there's going to be a reward pool, which is going to start at 5,000 XTZ per month. And it's going to be, and this is the part that I like, it's going to be split into a number of categories. So this is kind of a way to establish a framework of, these are the different kinds of things that we want to see. And then I think over the coming weeks or perhaps over the coming months, you'll see different people in the community perhaps maybe like move towards certain of these awards. So just for a few examples, we'll include a link to this in the show notes, but a few of the example awards would be like Indie Dev of the Month. You have an OG award, which is for people who have been in the community for a long time, stuck through the bear market, stuck through the bull market, and just throughout that whole time, they've been very determined, to stay as an active member of the community, which quite frankly, I think can get quite difficult during the bear market times. Not so difficult in the bull market times, but
right.
When token price is declining or stagnating, the overall engagement definitely goes down. So this is to recognize the people who are kind of immune to that and pushing on with the optimism. So like a few other things, you have Agora Anglers for casting ideas. You have Humble Coder Abode for unsolicited
Troll
contribution. Right. Oh yeah, and you have all the Troll Hunter awards. So that's pretty self-explanatory. So the cool thing here is that, there's all of these different categories that people can be nominated and rewarded for. And this is very different from, I would say, other traditional reward programs where it's actually the people who want to be rewarded. Those people kind of set up their proposal. So this is kind of taking that and flipping it 180 degrees, where we're kind of saying these are the awards that we're looking for, and then people can kind of not battle, but try to go ahead and win these awards. So that's really exciting, and I think this kind of thing is very interesting in the context of an open source project, because I think incentivization is one thing that many open source projects struggle with, and not only in blockchain, I mean, even outside the blockchain space. And that's mainly a factor of, like, if you want to admit it or not, the majority of people are prioritizing, potential capital gain for their work. So people aren't really comfortable with just giving up their time in exchange for nothing, right? And it depends what you value. Like if you truly value, you just want to do the work for the good of the world, then that's perfectly fine. But I think the reality, and perhaps I'm not sure what your view on this is, Will, but I think the reality is like the majority of the people on Earth want financial incentivization for their work.
Yeah, there's an inherent self-interest, that's just human, a pure human emotion.
Yeah, and there's and just to point out, there's nothing wrong with that, because
right.
The world runs on money. So it makes sense that if you want to kind of increase your impact on the world or increase your social class or something, like you want to trade your time for as much money as possible. So if a big part of your day is dedicated to promoting a project or working on an open source blockchain or anything like that, it's better for you to be incentivized for that than not. So I really think that this is a great idea. And yeah, did you have any other thoughts on this program, Will?
Yeah, no, actually going off those awards, this program, it fills a much needed gap. I think you had a lot of good points on it, but just off the top of my head, I can think of, a few people who have, been through the bear market, or contributing their time, without any compensation. One that comes to mind is Citizen B. He very active on Twitter. He also runs the Tezos Noob account. There's a few others who Claude Bard, he actually recently had an AMA in the Telegram chat, but he's written all these tutorials for developers. And there's a few other community members, but I think it fills a much needed gap to kind of give back to some of these people who, may not want to put up a grant or, just purely acting as a way of, compensating these people for their time.
Right. Yeah. I think it's definitely worth it to highlight the contributions of people, and beyond just saying like, oh, they're doing a great job. I think and the next step after that is to actually, compensate them in some way that helps them reinforce in their mind, like, oh, working on this project is like actually a good use of my time, and people are recognizing me for my work.
Yeah, that can potentially, change someone's mindset. They could start doing even more, and eventually join Tezos Commons, join TQ Tezos, and start getting even more involved in the ecosystem.
Yeah, so let's go ahead and move on to the next topic here. So there was a recent announcement from Tezos Commons, and it was a blog post about the recent GCP BigQuery integration with the Tezos blockchain. So that's kind of a lot of buzzwords. So let's kind of go ahead and break that down into what that actually means.
Partnership with Google.
Yeah. Partnership with Google, pump it. Okay, so GCP stands for Google Cloud Platform. And for those who don't know, GCP is kind of one of the big three when it comes to cloud computing. So at number one, you have Amazon Web Services. And then after that, it's GCP and Microsoft Azure. In terms of GCP and Microsoft, I forget the market share between them, but I think that GCP is number two. Like either way, I think this is a very significant announcement because it does allow a whole new class of products and services to be built on Tezos in a more efficient manner. So the reason why that's more efficient is that the current system of querying the data from the blockchain is, I'm not sure if this is the technical term for it, but the way that I see it is it's kind of like zero dimensional, or maybe perhaps one dimensional, where you just, if you're trying to query for the latest block height, it just returns the response that shows the block height, typically encoded in some like JSON format or something. And the problem with that is, first of all, it's not as fast as something like a database, and kind of it's also very hard to compare things across dimensions. So what I mean by that, like if you wanted to extract data, for example, maybe like the change in gas costs over a certain amount of time, there's no built-in way to query that from a Tezos node directly, because the node, there's no way to input like, I want this amount of time, and then I want to grab the gas cost from that and then spit out a chart. There's just no way to do that because that's not what the node is designed to do. So kind of previously, before this integration, you kind of had, like, if you wanted to get that kind of data set, you either had to build your own database out of the data that was queried from the node, so you can make a script or something that like makes requests to the node and it stores it into a database somewhere. But if just think about how much kind of lost time that would entail if every single dev who wanted to, kind of query the data on the blockchain in a productive way, like if they all had to make their own system of talking to the nodes and making the database. So that's kind of like not a great use of time. So what this BigQuery thing is, I can't say this, BigQuery. It's kind of Google Cloud's database. It's one of their database products that they offer, and you're basically storing the Tezos blockchain in what's called a relational database. So that kind of lets you ask the database for information that relates to each other. So like the example we said before, if you wanted to find the amount of gas costs over a certain period of time, you can specify the amount of time, and then you can also specify the type of data you want would be gas costs. So it finds the relational data between those two things, and then it will spit out the data for you. And to do that, it uses the industry standard SQL syntax, which is just a way of querying the database, kind of a programming language, but more like a syntax that you use to talk to the database. So this is really good for people who want to build things like charts and graphs and different things where you want to display all sorts of different metrics that apply to the Tezos blockchain. So I'm personally like very excited about these things. It's just it's just cool to see the Tezos blockchain being accessible in a way that really allows people to extract really useful information from that. And I think these kinds of integrations are crucial for mainstream adoption of a blockchain, because then like if a bank or something adopts the chain, then they have a way that they can, pull whatever metrics that they want from it for whatever they're doing. So that's kind of my thoughts on the BigQuery integration, and we'll include this announcement post here in the show notes as well.
Yeah, and adding on to that, Corey Sorov of Tezos Commons spent a ton of time working on this, so it's definitely nice to see this get announced and released for the Tezos community.
Yep.
All right, so I guess we can go ahead and wrap up things here. Before we do that, though, there was also another very large announcement, event, I should say, rather. The current protocol proposal has entered the final stage of voting. It's now in the promotion phase. So, if the current proposal reaches quorum, it will be successfully activated on mainnet. So, Brian, did you have any thoughts that you'd like to say on the current protocol amendment?
Not specifically. I mean, I guess I just want to say, it's kind of been a long time coming. So I'm really glad to see it finally move on to the final stage in the amendment process. And I'm very excited to see how Tezos evolves after this is deployed.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's going to open up some room for DeFi, and hopefully we'll see sapling in the upcoming proposal. But if you don't have anything else to add, Brian, I think we can go ahead and wrap us up.
Yeah. So thank you for listening to this episode of TezTalks Radio, and stay tuned for the next episode.